Department of Philosophy, School of Humanities, Xiamen University, Master's and Doctoral Academic Salon, issue 7 of the 2011 to 2012 academic year. Overall, issue 39. Let's get started right away. Now, we are honored to have Khenpo Sodargye here. He will be giving us a detailed lecture on the profound philosophy of Tathāgatagarbha. So now, we welcome Khenpo to give this lecture.
Dear respected teachers and fellow students, I would like to warmly welcome all of you to this gathering today. I am truly very happy to be here with all of you today with the Xiamen University Masters and Doctoral Salon. It's a great opportunity to have this exchange with teachers and students together here today, which is truly wonderful. I've had a very good impression of Xiamen University for a long time. And this positive feeling has remained with me ever since I first heard about the university, which was probably around 10 years ago. This particular impression, as you might understand, is actually a very personal one. Around 2002, I stayed in Xiamen for about half a year at that time. During this period, I translated the extensive biography of Shakyamuni Buddha. I was living in a hospital nearby in the city for a short period of time. Sometimes I would often come to Xiamen University. I walked around. It's really hard to see clearly at night. There's a very beautiful lake. I would often bring a few pages of Tibetan text to the lakeside. Every day, I would carefully set aside 4 pages for long sheets. I would take them to the lakeside, translating and reflecting as I went. At that time, I felt that at Xiamen University, whether teaching or studying, it was a kind of a enjoyment, and I was very envious. So when I came here just now, even though a long time has passed, I still feel a very wonderful sense of nostalgia. This is just a simple personal experience. Today, as Professor Ouyang just mentioned, our exchange here is, of course, entirely academic in nature and is intended solely for scholarly discussion. It's an academic, scholarly, and research-based form of communication with everyone, everywhere. The topic of this exchange is the philosophy of Tathāgatagarbha. Yesterday, a few doctoral and graduate students here, they actually brought up some questions. I haven't had the chance to think about them in detail yet. Because when it comes to the philosophy, some scholars approach it with a highly critical perspective. In some cases, while others genuinely want to accept it, continue learning about it, and even actively practice it in their daily lives. This is, at this particular moment in time, the current situation. If you belong to the first group who want to understand and critique the Tathāgatagarbha philosophy, I think this is actually quite difficult. Today, I may need to explain this issue to everyone as well. If you want to understand it in a positive light, of course, in our brief exchange tonight, it's impossible to explain everything completely clearly. But we can still, maybe within this short time, let's explore and learn together with everyone all together. So, the very first level is this. Right now, including in Taiwan and Hong Kong, some Buddhist monks have recently said that the Tathāgatagarbha was actually influenced by certain Indian religion. Buddhism follows dependent origination and emptiness and denies permanence. But the Tathāgatagarbha is recognized as something permanent, so it doesn't align with some Buddhist doctrine. Some individual monks have already put forward this viewpoint. Later on, during a certain period, at that time, some scholars also, as well as various others, criticized this issue. Those of you should be aware of this, but I hold a completely different view on this matter. Because although some scriptures do say that the Tathāgatagarbha is permanent, but this kind of permanence is different from the Brahma of non-Buddhist traditions or the so-called self of a deity. The Buddha explained this very clearly in the Lankavatara Sutra. It is about being free from conceptual elaborations. What does it mean to be free from conceptual elaborations? It means being free from all attachment to states, right or wrong, and beyond the 4 extremes and 8 fabrications. As described in the Madhyamaka, it is a great luminosity that is free from conceptual elaborations. Moreover, the difference between this and deity has already been explained very clearly and in detail to Bodhisattva Mahamati in the Lankavatara Sutra. If a Buddhist does not simply accept the concept of Tathāgatagarbha, then the third turning of the Dhamma wheel by Shakyamuni Buddha, as well as all the tantras and treatises of Vajrayana, cannot be acknowledged. And it's not the third turn even in the second turning of the Dhamma wheel. There are more subtle explanations for the existence of Tathāgatagarbha. For example, in the well-known Prajnaparamita Sutras, the Buddha himself says, the mind has no mind. Its nature is luminosity. The mind has no inherent nature, but its essence is luminous. If we deny the existence of Tathāgatagarbha, then in Chinese Buddhism, whether it is the Tiantai school, Chen school, or Huayan school, the scriptures and treatises of all schools cannot establish a foundation. We even have to acknowledge that if a sentient being reaches Buddhahood and there is no Tathāgatagarbha, and the essence of mind is entirely emptiness, like space, how does emptiness change the first Bhumi Bodhisattva to the 10th Bhumi Bodhisattva and at long last finally attains Buddhahood? If the mind does not have the luminous aspect of Tathāgatagarbha, it simply does not make sense. So on this issue, there is simply no way I can fully explain it in just a few words today. I hope that many students here today will approach the study of scriptures related to Tathāgatagarbha with a fair and impartial attitude. For example, in Chinese Buddhism, there is the well-known scripture, specifically the Mahavaipulya Tathāgatagarbha Sūtra. The Tathāgatagarbha Sūtra originally had 4 translations. The earliest one should have been translated by Dharmakshema. It was likely during the Western Jin dynasty that it was translated into Chinese. Later, this and the second translation were no longer available. Currently, we have the 3rd and 4th translations. These were translated by Amagavatra and Buddhatrata. I had previously compared them with the Tibetan version, but this time I didn't have time to do so. Because the topic was chosen suddenly yesterday, I didn't bring my Tibetan materials, but I have actually compared them before the Tibetan Tathāgatagarbha Sūtra and the Chinese Tathāgatagarbha Sūtra. In the process of comparing them, the version translated by Amagavajra is a bit more detailed, while the one by Buddhatrata is more concise. But in fact, the meaning is absolutely exactly the same. Earlier, the reasoning behind the 9 analogies was already explained. Afterwards, the Buddha summarizes them in verse form. So I think that many of you here, if you truly just want to understand that all beings have the qualities or third turning of the Dhamma wheel by Shakyamuni Buddha, as well as the most fundamental, most essential, and most important aspects of Vajrayana Buddhism. If you understand these, you must start with the exoteric scriptures, such as the Samdhinimokkana Sutra, Lankavatara Sutra, and Mahaparinirvana Sutra. The Mahaparinirvana Sutra also discusses this, stating that the Tathāgatagarbha is extremely profound and that ordinary people cannot comprehend its meaning. Even the bodhisattvas of 10 bhumis are like people trying to see forms at night, unable to see everything clearly and completely. Only upon reaching Buddhahood can one fully understand. This is stated in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. So, as ordinary people, can we fully explain the concept of Tathāgatagarbha? Of course, there are certainly many limitations. It's a bit like a blind person carefully feeling the body of an elephant. We can only infer or rely on certain teachings to gain some understanding. So does that mean none of us here today can know anything at all about the study of Tathāgatagarbha? That's not the case either. It's just like emptiness, which is also extremely profound. But Chandrakirti, relying on the teachings of Nagarjuna, was able to study it, and in the end, he could also explain it fully to others. In the same way, we carefully follow in the footsteps of the great masters of the past, honoring their legacy, such as those from the Naima and Jonang traditions in Tibetan Buddhism. There are many particularly precious treatises on Tathāgatagarbha teachings and philosophy. And as for India, like Asanga Bodhisattva's commentary on the Ratnagotra Vibhaga, as well as works like Nagarjuna Bodhisattva's in praise of the Dharma Dhatu, among others. In these texts, the explanations of Tathāgatagarbha differ. They provide clear expositions, especially if you want to understand the meaning of Tathāgatagarbha. You must study the Ratnagotra Vibhaga composed by Bodhisattva Maitreya. I'm not sure if everyone studied the Ratnagotra Vibhaga. Main contents of it come from the well-known Buddha Nature Sutra. Buddha Nature Sutra is available in Chinese Buddhism, but most of it is in fact primarily material taken from the well-known Tathāgatagarbha Sūtra. I think that many of you here have probably, in fact, studied it quite deeply. Unlike some of our other discussions, when it comes to Tathāgatagarbha, in fact, as you may know, it relates to the third turning of the Dharma wheel by the Buddha. It is also important, especially as Buddhists, many people often talk about realizing the mind and seeing one's true nature. But if we want to understand how to realize the mind, if you do not accept the concept of Tathāgatagarbha, then there is no way to explain it. No matter which Chan, Zen text, or Vajrayana text you happen to look at, or any of the most profound teachings and instructions in Buddhism today, they all involve the luminosity of Tathāgatagarbha light. Is it merely a theoretical concept? In fact, it is not. When we look inward, perhaps everyone here has only approached this academically, without ever considering what our own mind is truly like. I don't know if any of you present have ever personally observed it. When you use the mind to observe the mind, you may not be able to find it. The mind has absolutely no color, no definite shape, and no distinctions whatsoever. Its very nature, in essence, is luminous. But this luminosity by itself, is this luminosity similar to that of a light bulb, or perhaps the sun? It is not. Is the nature of the mind simply nothingness? Is it empty like space? That is not the case. If it were, then everything about us would be in any way truly indistinguishable from emptiness. Within its manifestations, thoughts and mental activities arise continuously. Its very natural emptiness and luminosity are inseparable. This is the method, theoretically, to realize mind's nature in Chan Buddhism, called seeing the nature and awakening the mind. Of course, if one truly wants to attain realization, there is another method. About Buddhism, I often think this way. Nowadays, of course, worldly knowledge is vast and all-encompassing with all sorts of disciplines. To master all knowledge without any obstacles is not so easy to achieve within a limited human lifespan. But what is the most important thing? In my own view, it is to realize the true nature of our own mind. If we have not realized the true nature of our mind, then coming into this world, I feel, is to some extent somewhat regrettable. It doesn't matter if you don't have wealth or status or even fame, but what is truly needed for every being, for every life, is to realize the nature of mind. To realize mind's nature, then unlike animals or other sentient beings, we have this opportunity. We humans consider ourselves to be very intelligent. We think that we are now especially advanced, but we often focus on studying external material things and have never really observed what our mind is truly like. Some people, even when it comes to very simple things, such as the people trusting the mind's continuity, revolve in samsara, even this most basic knowledge up to now, still leaves them feeling uncertain and unsure in their hearts. This phenomenon, especially in terms of the overall level of human wisdom, I think is a kind of tragedy. No matter what, everyone's values simply. Each person's aspirations are not entirely the same. Let me put it another way, just to be clear. Honestly, it really isn't all that easy as you might expect. To truly understand Tathāgatagarbha, I especially hope that among you here, there are some people who, as I just mentioned, do in fact have some critical views about the concept of Tathāgatagarbha. If you really have valid reasoning, logical arguments, and sufficient evidence, everyone has the right to speak. And of course, we won't stop you, but if you don't have sufficient evidence and theoretical basis and just speak nonsense, then that is a disgrace. I've seen some scholars who, regarding the scriptures and tantras, as well as the explanations and commentaries by many eminent monks and great masters from India and China, never seen anything before. They just often take things completely out of context from a few articles, and among many people think they understand everything around them. Whether it's Tibetan Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, or Mahayana Buddhism, or schools like Yogacara, Madhyamaka, or some Tathāgatagarbha philosophies, they think they have truly mastered everything. Then among many people, they start to establish their own sects. Actually, sometimes I think, whether it's Buddhist studies or perhaps other scientific theories, if you haven't done sufficient research, yet you still go out to promote or declare your views. I'm afraid that from the perspective of an experienced professional in this day and age, it may not be considered very dignified. So for the intellectuals present here, especially regarding the philosophy of Tathāgatagarbha, it is very important to be cautious in this area. Why should we be cautious? Because its principles are extremely profound. If we say that the concept of Tathāgatagarbha, everything we understand about it, is provisional or unreasonable, then that would be a very ridiculous thing. If we say the Buddha's second turning of the Dharma wheel is unreasonable because from the perspective of luminosity, it is different from the teachings on luminosity. Third turning is provisional because its perspective is different from that of emptiness. In the history of Tibet, some notable and influential great masters from the Jonang and Gelug schools had slight differences regarding other emptiness and self-emptiness. But in fact, the ultimate and true intent of their final views is completely consistent. The predecessors of our Nyingma tradition, such as the omniscient Longchen Rabjam, Vimalamitra, and Mifam Rinpoche, in the extremely precious and invaluable teachings of many renowned, highly respected, great spiritual masters of wisdom, Buddha Shakyamuni's second, third turnings are completely integrated and harmonious. Appearance and emptiness are non-dual. This is the true nature of all phenomena. Emptiness was already explained quite clearly as it is taught in the second turning of the Dharma wheel. This principle was explained by Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, as well as by scholars such as Aryadeva and Shantideva, along with many other Indian scholars. The Tathāgatagarbha, Buddha nature, teachings of the third turning of the Dharma wheel also contain considerable truth within the exoteric tradition, especially in Vajrayana Tathāgatagarbha. If you truly want to understand, the best way is to see Vajrayana text SB, the Great Magical Net, Secret Treasury Tantra. There are also the Kalachakra Tantra and the Guyasamaja Tantra. Of course, even higher teachings include Mahamudra and Dzogchen. Within these, there are indeed essential instructions which point things out to you in an extremely direct way. When you practice, you likely won't need many words. So that's how it is. It's clear at a glance. You could say it really gets straight to the point. Everything becomes completely clear and understandable. Of course, this requires a certain kind of faith. If you lack faith, it's very difficult to establish any theory. So if we want to truly understand the concept of Tathāgatagarbha, many people nowadays actually don't really have a truly deep understanding of it. Today I'd like to share, based on the Tathāgatagarbha Sūtra and the Ratnagotra Vibhaga, as well as the essential instructions from some masters of wisdom. To briefly, and just for a moment, talk about it. There are 9 different analogies illustrating how all sentient beings inherently possess the various qualities of Tathāgatagarbha. In fact, many people may have come across these in books like the Ratnagotra Vibhaga and others, but perhaps you haven't reflected on them yourself. I hope that whether you are religious or not, it doesn't really matter. But you should really give some thought to this question. We sentient beings all possess a kind of Buddha nature. This Buddha nature was explained to us by the Buddha long ago using very simple and easy to understand analogies. Whether or not you believe in what these analogies illustrate, if you don't believe, you should have a reason. If you do believe, then indeed, from the state of ordinary beings up to Buddhahood, there is a luminous mind, and the Tathāgatagarbha should exist. So regarding this question, I have also studied the treatise on the Tathāgatagarbha before. Now, I don't remember it clearly. I'd like to briefly and concisely point out these particular metaphors to everyone. Among these 9 metaphors, the first one is the Buddha statue inside a withered flower. Inside the withered flower, there is a very magnificent Buddha statue. Metaphor illustrates this. For example, all of its petals and leaves have completely withered. When you slowly peel everything away, inside there appears an extremely radiant Buddha statue. The appearance of this Buddha statue, in fact, can only be seen after all the outer petals and leaves have been carefully removed. If they are not removed, you can't see it. This Buddha statue represents the Tathāgatagarbha. The so-called petals and leaves on the outside actually refer mainly to the seeds of dormant greed, the 84,000 affliction. When all of the 84,000 different afflictions and troubles of sentient beings are gradually and completely dispelled, the Tathāgatagarbha Buddha will manifest. Of course, this requires cultivation and practice and requires genuine first-hand understanding. This metaphor is generally used for those who have not yet entered the path, for people who have not begun their spiritual journey. Then, the second metaphor in this discussion talks about the presence of honey that can be found within a busy, active swarm of bees, illustrating the idea more vividly. In a lush, vibrant forest, there are millions of bees all gathered together. At the very center of the swarm of bees, there is actually golden, delicious, sweet, fragrant honey. Some truly wise individuals, after discovering this honey, try every possible way to drive away all the bees on the outside, and then carefully take out the honey, which is fresh and golden and can be enjoyed directly. Here, the bees on the outside, in this context, are a metaphor for all kinds of afflictions, especially those that are mainly rooted in latent anger. Surrounded in the middle, in the very center, like golden sweet honey, the Tathāgatagarbha is present and endures, abiding within. For the honey-like Tathāgatagarbha to manifest, in fact, all the bees on the outside must disperse completely. These bees are a metaphor for our various discriminating thoughts. The reason why many of us are unable to see our own mind for ourselves at this particular point in time. We still have many significant obstacles ahead of us. Some people often ask, if all sentient beings are in fact Buddhas, then why exactly are sentient beings still experiencing suffering in this world? Actually, this is really very simple. Buddhism does not accept the current appearances of all sentient beings as Buddhas. Ultimate reality is Buddha, but the current appearances is not. In other words, there are 2 kinds of Buddha nature, specifically the inherently pure Buddha nature and the defilement, free Buddha nature. The first kind of Buddha nature means that, in essence, all sentient beings are Buddhas. However, from temporary and cognitive obscurations, it's hidden. When it is covered, it is actually not the true Buddha yet. Only when you remove these obstacles can the true Buddha manifest. For example, the true nature of water should be water. When it turns into ice, its true nature is still water. But when it is in the form of ice, you cannot call it water. Ice and water are different. However, the true nature of ice is actually no different from that of water. So this analogy is actually very simple. Just now, the honey in the honeycomb was used as an analogy to illustrate that sentient beings possess the Tathāgatagarbha, Buddha nature. This particular analogy is specifically intended for those individuals who have already, in some way, entered the path. The third analogy is the fruit within the chaff, which is to say, using this metaphor, for example, on the outside there are several layers of chaff, and inside, whether it's barley, wheat, or other grains, such as the grain itself is covered by layers of husks. When all the husks are peeled away, the grain inside can be revealed. And finally, you can enjoy it. In the same way, we sentient beings are actually dominated by ignorance and many latent afflictions which have already deeply obscured the luminous and brilliantly radiant innate nature of the Tathāgatagarbha within our own minds and hearts. Afflictions rooted in ignorance are transformed by the Buddha's turning of the Dhamma wheel. And once we truly understand the genuine truth, all obstacles are then completely dispelled. After all these obstacles have been cleared away, the true Tathāgatagarbha manifests. This corresponds to the path of accumulation. In other words, this is a third analogy. The fourth analogy is pure gold within a heap of filth. For example, imagine a pile of filthy, dirty heaps of excrement. Deep in this pile of filth lies pure gold. Some wise individuals have already discovered that there is pure gold inside. Then, by every possible means, like we mine for gold today, after clearing away all the filth on the outside, the pure gold can be extracted. Within all beings, there is a Tathāgatagarbha as pure as gold. It is buried deep within a pit of intense filth, namely the impurities of greed, anger, and ignorance. This has always existed inherently in its very nature, and once we come to understand the truth and dispel all the afflictions and deluded thoughts, the impurities on the outside, then its true nature can be fully revealed. This analogy corresponds to those on the path of preparation, the path of application. The fifth analogy is the underground treasure. Using the underground treasure as a metaphor, everyone knows that some of us, sometimes in some poor people's households, there is quite remarkably a truly great treasure carefully hidden beneath the ground. But this treasure has, for some reason, never been sought out by its owner. The person living above it, this person is unaware that such a treasure lies below. Later, some people conduct an investigation and discover the treasure underneath. When it is finally discovered, in fact, even during the time when the person was living in poverty, the treasure already existed in their home all along. In the same way, we sentient beings, existing within the fertile soil of various afflictions, difficulties, and persistent self-clinging, actually truly possess everything, including the Buddha's excellent marks, the 18 unique qualities, the 10 powers, the 4 fearlessnesses, and so on. The treasure of these virtues is perfectly complete within us. Only after realizing the wisdom of selflessness, like the absence of a personal self, can these qualities fully manifest. This analogy corresponds to the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddha. This should definitely be the fifth analogy in this series. The sixth analogy is the sprout within the seed. That is to say, inside a small gray seed, there is in fact truly the potential to eventually produce fruit. But when we look at the seed, we really can't see this incredible potential to bear fruit at all. If you let it develop and mature underground, the thin skin and seed are eventually discarded. And in the end, it ultimately and completely transforms into roots, shoots, and even a tall, majestic, towering tree. In the same way, the Buddha nature of sentient beings is like the essential power within a seed. Once the right conditions have matured, everything on the outside disappears. Every single outer layer, all the protective shells and coverings that once surrounded it are completely gone, leaving nothing but the essential core behind. And then its true original nature is revealed. Generally speaking, this is called seeing the path and is divided into two types. The first comparison or analogy for seeing the path that we are discussing in this series, this is the sixth one. The seventh analogy goes like this. In the following way, a very dirty and worn out piece of cloth, stained from years of use, is carefully used to wrap around a statue that is made entirely of gold, or sometimes even a precious. Once there's a poor person. He wrapped an extremely valuable statue in a particularly filthy old cloth, but the people around had no idea what was actually inside that especially dirty cloth. It was only later they discovered there was a very precious statue inside. Similarly, we sentient beings, within the impure defilements to be eliminated, there exists something extremely precious, just like the precious statue mentioned earlier. This also corresponds to the defilements eliminated by the path of seeing. The seventh analogy aligns with this. There are two more analogies that follow. One analogy is about a poor woman carrying a wheel-turning king in her womb. A very poor and extremely unattractive woman is pregnant with a wheel-turning king. He was called a wheel-turning king, now called an ordinary king. When such a king is in the womb, it is impossible for others to see or realize that this particular person is actually carrying him. He will become a great king who will truly guide and educate everyone in the future. Only after he is born do people realize that there was actually such an extraordinary person inside her all along. In the same way, for every sentient being, we can't tell they could become Buddhas in the future. They possess this extremely important quality of Buddha nature. But if any sentient being did not have this Buddha nature right now to attain Buddhahood, it would be impossible for it to happen without any cause or reason. This is in spiritual cultivation, specifically referring to the impure stages from the first to the seventh Bhumi. The final analogy is the precious statue within the clay mold. As for the precious statue within the clay mold, in ancient times, when making statues, there was a special kind of mold used. This mold already contained all kinds of patterns in the statue's fine feature. After melting gold into liquid, it would be poured into the mold. Once the mold is opened, we realize that all the patterns inside the mold, all of it, have now been revealed. Before you open it, you really have absolutely no idea at all. In the same way, for all sentient beings, before we engage in spiritual practice, before we realize the true nature of the mind, we have no idea at all. Some people may, even to some observers, seem to lack Buddha nature altogether, at least at first glance. But in reality, that's simply not the case. This also is directly related to and reflects the ultimate purity of the three grounds, which are essential stages in the path of cultivation. Of course, the examples I just gave above may be considered to be somewhat abstract in nature, or perhaps a bit difficult to grasp, or involve specialized Buddhist concepts such as those found in traditional teachings. Sometimes, when we talk about Tathāgatagarbha, especially in discussions, if we don't use certain technical terms, it's impossible to explain it clearly. To understand more, I hope everyone will briefly compare the Tathāgatagarbha Sūtra with the Ratnagotra Vibhaga. By comparing them, the insights we gain from this are indeed absolutely extremely important for us. At the very least, everyone should have this basic understanding. In fact, the true explanations of the Tathāgatagarbha itself are also clearly and explicitly stated in important Buddhist texts, such as the well-known Saudhinyamokana Sutra. Tathāgatagarbha was not mentioned during the first turning of the Dharma wheel. In the second turning of the Dharma wheel, it was taught that all phenomena are empty. Is there Tathāgatagarbha in the second turning of the Dharma wheel? Well, we can put it this way. It's not explicit, nor is it discussed much. But the idea is still present. Otherwise, the Buddha would be contradicting himself, which is impossible. Buddhists don't say this is impossible. Nowadays, many people and scholars, after research, understand that the Buddha is not as simple as some people in the world imagine. That's not the case the Buddha's Vajra words, when it comes to the third turning, the concept of Tathāgatagarbha in Buddhism becomes relatively clear, especially when the Buddha in Vaishali and in various different places in India at Mount Meru expounded the Kalachakra Tantra. He explained it in just even greater detail. Therefore, if we want to understand fully and holistically, we need to integrate all of the Buddha's teachings in order to truly understand. Of course, before we have truly and fully understood, we must never, under any circumstances, slander carelessly. If we slander carelessly, the Buddha also said in the sutras that the consequences are extremely severe. This is also mentioned in the Nirvana Sutra. Some people recklessly disparage and claim, and if they slander the fundamental principles of Tathāgatagarbha, then, according to the Buddha's view of cause and effect, these beings will become animals in the future. For example, crows or various types of owls, as well as all sorts of pitiful and unfortunate animals living in difficult circumstances. I often see that nowadays, certain individual Dharma teachers and scholars, they never studied, but they still said, Tathāgatagarbha is wrong. I reject Tathāgatagarbha. But just because you don't acknowledge it, does that mean it doesn't exist? That's not the case. Without solid evidence, your personal denial doesn't mean anything. But some people deliberately create negative karma. To us Buddhists, some of these people seem especially pitiable because they have no basis, nor have they studied the Buddhist scriptures. They directly criticize Tathāgatagarbha. I think this is not something we are capable of doing. If you can criticize Tathāgatagarbha, at least part of the 84 Dharma teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, you should be thoroughly and effortlessly proficient in them. Otherwise, I'm afraid you don't have the right. Criticizing the principles of Tathāgatagarbha is really not that simple. So today, I especially hope that everyone present will have a positive understanding of Tathāgatagarbha in the future. And don't briefly listening to one or two classes or reading one or two books or casually flipping through a couple of materials on your own, don't jump to conclusions or call it wrong. A lot of people like to say things like this. This is something that we are, quite frankly, rather unwilling to accept. Secondly, when it comes to Tathāgatagarbha, in particular, we should perhaps contemplate and reflect on it, to study and research it. The merit from this is great. Perhaps some of you admit the merit, but some others don't see it. But I personally believe, and I must say, especially here in the beautiful and culturally rich region of southern Fujian, whether you are teachers or students, everyone has a good habit. People say they don't believe in Buddhism, but in reality, everyone believes in Guanyin. Basically, many people here have faith in Guanyin Bodhisattva and in Buddhism, unlike certain other cities. In some modern cities, it seems that everyone, deep down in their hearts, truly has no real faith at all. But for us, from a very young age, this kind of mindset has actually been quite beneficial. And really quite good. I believe that for many of us, at the very least, we do not deny the idea of merit. Today, as I share with you all, I feel very happy inside. Why is that? Yesterday, when they mentioned Tathāgatagarbha, it actually possesses immense merit. I am also sharing with a joyful heart. It's not that I'm presenting profound principles, but in reality, if someone goes to study and research it, then Tathāgatagarbha truly is, perhaps you haven't read it before. If you look at the latter part of the Tathāgatagarbha Sūtra, it mentions many kinds of merit. For example, if you write down the principles of Tathāgatagarbha, or carry it with you, or frequently contemplate and thoughtfully reflect on it, or explain it to others, recite it yourself, and so on, all these merits surpass the merit of making offerings to countless Buddhas over millions of kalpas. I have also thought about this before, and now I often have this feeling. When I find excellent Buddhist scriptures, I think it would be wonderful to study this myself and share it with everyone. I once read the Tathāgatagarbha Sūtra, and afterward, I thought in my lifetime, I should give a full teaching on it to everyone, or at least set aside some time to study it thoroughly myself. This is truly one of my aspirations. In fact, among those of you present, Some of you have this opportunity. Actually, the Tathāgatagarbha is something we really need to understand. Why? Is that because we often talk about it, such as the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch and Chanzen Koan. What are these koans really talking about? They are simply the natural revelation of the true face of the Tathāgatagarbha. These things are not just about the present moment. We often hear sayings like, meditation is not about the legs, reciting the Buddha's name is not about the mouth. So when you meditate, does it matter whether you sit in full lotus or half lotus position? Many people emphasize outward behavior. Of course, in certain situations, actions and rituals are also important. But the key is understanding the nature of the mind. When we recite the Buddha's name, it's not that the mouth is the most important part. What truly matters in the end is the mind itself. If our mind is not oriented in the right direction, then no matter how we act, it may not make sense. There was once a Master Mazu Dawi. When Master Mazu first arrived, he was especially fond of meditation. Day and night, he always sat in meditation. Later, the well-known Chan Master Huairang, the respected teacher, realized that the time was truly ripe and perfect to carefully guide him. So he went there and asked him, what exactly are you doing? He said, I am practicing meditation. Why do you meditate? I meditate to become a Buddha. Each and every day, without missing a single one, Huairang would patiently and methodically take a simple tile in his hands and begin to grind it, repeating the same careful action as part of his daily routine. Grind made a zzz sound. This directly had a certain impact on Mazu's meditation. Later, Mazu asked him, what are you doing? He replied, I'm trying to turn this tile into a mirror. How does a tile turn into a mirror? Then Huairang said to him, if you just sit in meditation, how can you become a Buddha? Afterwards, he began realizing things. Not only are my actions truly important, but perhaps my thoughts are, in fact, even more crucial. After this exchange, Huairang, the master, also said to him, ancient people rode carriages. He asked, when riding in a carriage, is it actually more important to whip the horse, or rather the carriage itself? What do you think? From this question, he had already clearly understood the direction. Later, after relying on his teacher for 10 years, Mazu finally attained enlightenment. Enlightenment means observing the mind is important. So nowadays, whether it's university professors or students, I have visited many schools. Nowadays, many people are indeed interested in certain Buddhist teachings. Some want to understand the theory, while others are interested in actual meditation practice. They hope to gain some understanding through meditation or practical cultivation. This is extremely important. According to the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, if one does not recognize one's original nature, studying the Dharma is of no benefit. If one recognizes one's original nature, one is called a great being, teacher of humans and gods, Buddha. If we truly engage in meditation now with full awareness, or if we truly understand the original nature of Tathāgatagarbha, we can attain realization. This is called enlightenment. We have returned to our true home. I especially hope that everyone here in the future will use various means and skillful methods to truly comprehend and appreciate the true meaning of Tathāgatagarbha in its fullest sense. That's about it for today, all right?
We thank Khenpo Sodargye.